Janie died. I did what I could. It was hard to watch. She weighed nothing towards the end. She had literally shrunk to the size of a 10-year-old. I washed her, fed her, changed her, carried her to the bathroom. To watch her in pain was almost too much for me. I loved her. In the end, it was too much for me. When she started to beg me, I held out as long as I could. I buried her over at the back of the field near where the wood begins. That was 5 winters ago. I go and sit there sometimes. The mound has shrunk back down and been mostly reclaimed by the field and covered in rough grass. In a few years from now, if I'm still alive, I won't be able to tell where the exact spot is anymore. But that is the world we live in now. Nature prevails over everything. Villages, towns, cities, mostly gone. In 100 years, all will have been consumed by nature. Sure, I only have to look about myself. Cultivated fields have gone, subsumed by weeds and brambles. Roads lasted, but are breaking up now and eroding. Everything, including humans, dead or alive, eventually return to the wild, to nature. Our sophistication was only ever really skin deep, and that was something many humans had forgotten. When push comes to shove, we are all on our own, and when the end came, there was no one to come and save us. After years, decades of worldwide interconnectivity, it all fell apart almost overnight. Well, that was what it looked like. Really, though, it had been coming down the pipeline for years. Hard to believe now, but there was a time when we all had too much information. Now it's easy to see that the more information swilling about, the harder it is to find the truth. But then, the truth was never the point, was it? Of course, none of us ordinary people really knew what was going on anyway. We just thought we did. It was a time when any fool with a computer could claim they knew the truth. Every viewpoint was on the internet, all the madness there for anybody and everybody to access, controlled and generated by multi-billionaires who, while drowning us in uninvited adverts, told us plebs it was free. In this post world, it seems stupid now that most of humanity could be conned into believing in so-called facts called up on a screen from origins unknown. In this grave new world, there's not much you can do about real health problems. I've been lucky. I haven't died of sepsis or cancer like Janie, or cholera or typhoid or any one of the other multitudes of sicknesses that we now have no cure for. But luck doesn't last forever. My heart. Something ain't right. I get a pain under my heart and my left arm gets pins and needles and I can't close my fist. If I sit down, rest, it mostly goes away after a few minutes. I try to hide it from Ty, but I can see him watching me sometimes. I think he knows something is wrong. He started to take on more of the heavy work. He tells me he's 17 now, a man. Surprisingly enough, he's turned out into a good lad. Hybrid wars have been going on between countries for decades. Cyber attacks, systems failing, economic and social, elections compromised. It was hard to believe in anything. Of course, we plebs, we only ever know what we're told. What this or that country was doing to us. We're never told what we're doing to other nations. But anyone could see capitalism had been failing for years, and in the end, materialism just ate itself. The world was awash with stuff it didn't really need. Ultimately, though, it was nature that brought the world to its knees. When the idea of global warming took hold, there were a lot of jokes about England becoming like a semi-tropical island, growing pineapples, a coastline fringed with coconut palms. That didn't happen. Instead, it rained and rained and rained, more every year, and flooding became endemic. Winter storms with 100-mile-an-hour gales became the norm. With most of the ice caps melting, the seas rising, England lost great swatches of the coast and country. All those houses built on England's floodplains became uninhabitable. People lost everything. Many lost their lives. We're still lucky, though, compared to the low-lying countries around the world swamped beyond reclamation. Then there were the solar winds and magnetic storms, which disrupted satellite operations, which disrupted power grids and navigation systems. England is a small country with a lot of people. When the Thames barrier collapsed and the whole of the Thames Valley flooded, and I mean deep, there was no social support. Millions died. How many? That's a moot question. Think the best part of 10 million people dead in London alone. The people that survived were the people who were not there, like me. My dad was one of the unfortunate ones. No, I didn't go back to try and find him. Maybe back then, when it first happened, people thought there would be someone to come and save us, but looking back, it was obvious no one would. America had been falling apart for decades. It couldn't save itself. It wasn't a cohesive country anymore. Death and violence ruled. Not that it was any different here. There were massive amounts of violence and cruelty in the aftermath. Danger was everywhere. It seemed mankind couldn't stop killing each other, no matter what. In this world, there's not much use for old people. It's a world for the young and fit. Everything in life, even now, 25 years on, is lived pretty close to the edge. The group over the hill tell me I'm the oldest person they've ever encountered. Maybe I am. I was 27 when it happened. I'm somewhere in my 50s now, but exactly where I'm not sure. It's been less than 30 years, but more than 25. The way things have been, it's easy to lose a year or maybe two. Sure, there's nothing and no one to tell anybody anything anymore. Dates don't have the same meaning. It's down to seasons. Before the end, people would often talk about the end of the world. It was a kind of joke at the time, but not, if you know what I mean. I would tell friends I should worry. I was one of the people who would be useful come the revolution or the end of the world. I was a carpenter. I could build a house or a cabin. I worked on enough jobs to understand the rudiments of electricity and plumbing. Well, that was how I spun it to my friends. The reality is, even being a carpenter ain't going to save you. Although, in a way, carpentry did save me. My dad raised me. My mum died when I was 3. There'd been one of those outrages on the tube when she was on her way back home from work. Died of smoke inhalation, never made it above ground. It's sad, I suppose, but to be honest, I was a little kid and after a while I didn't really remember her. When I got older, I'd look at the photos on my dad's computer. She was pretty and smiling, but I didn't know her. Know what I mean? I don't think my dad ever got over her, though. I didn't do well at school, and things didn't get better as I turned a teenager. My dad wasn't a stupid man, he could see which way the wind was blowing. The agreement was that if he got me out of school, I would get a job. He set me up with this old guy, Teddy, old, probably about the same age as I am now, who had a carpentry workshop. It wasn't an apprenticeship as such, more a work as you learn experience. By the time I was 20, though, I'd started up as a carpenter on my own. Living in London, there was always plenty of work. I didn't really know how lucky I was. In my early 20s, when one of my friends got sent to prison for a vicious mugging, I think that was when I realised exactly how lucky I was. My dad and I were going to the pub for a game of pool, and I told him, getting me out of school and into carpentry was the best thing you've ever done for me. It was meant as a compliment, but he gave me a baffled look. He probably thought of all the things he'd done over the years, the thousands, a little bit of unnoticed stuff that parents all do. I could see by the expression on his face, the little twist of his lips, that what I'd said had hurt him. The best I could do was let him beat me at pool. That cheered him. But I don't think he got it because he didn't know my mate or what I was really saying. I feel kind of sorry for both of us, and I'm sorry he died and I wasn't there. 3 or so years before the end, I built a library for a hedge fund manager who wasn't a total wanker. He told me once, in the business he was in, you had to decide how much money you wanted to make, and when you'd done that, you had to get out because if you don't, everything becomes about more money and you corrupt your soul. At the time, he lived with his family in a large terrace house in southwest London. 6 months or so before the end, he contacted me and asked if I would build another library at a manor house he'd bought in Suffolk, a few miles from Newmarket. He told me they were moving to the country because he didn't like the way the world was shaping up. I couldn't believe the place when we got there. There was a long private road which ended in a crescent in front of the house. He proudly showed me around. The house was big and practically empty. The grounds were huge. There was a squash court, a fishing lake, a quarter acre of greenhouses and an orchard. Over at the back of the lake, a huge pit had been dug, and I asked what it was for. He told me. I'm going to bury a container and fill it with essentials, dry goods, water, fuel, bottled gas, enough to last at least a couple of years. When things go bad this time, they will really go bad. By the time I went down to build the library, the shipping container had been buried and disguised. If I didn't know it was there, I wouldn't have found it. I know it sounds strange, but I nearly finished the library before the end. But then I didn't know what was happening or what was going to happen or that it was the end. In the past few years, there have been plenty of glitches in the matrix, and I just thought, here we go again. Internet access hadn't been set up in the empty house. I wanted information, so, like any other fool, I went to my phone. Nothing. Most phone services have gone satellite, but without an interconnected world, forget about it. Sure, the satellites are still up there, mostly, but these days they are just like recurring shooting stars. Anyway, I wasn't up on the mainstream news, and I didn't know about the Thames Barrier or any of the other stuff that was happening. Then the electricity went down for a couple of days, came back, and went down again for good. I was staying in the manor house while I worked. It was so quiet out there, especially at night, and I heard the cars coming way before they arrived. Apart from when I'd gone to the local shop for supplies, I hadn't seen a soul for nearly 3 weeks. At first, I thought it was the family come down to see how work was progressing. But when two cars roared into the crescent, spilling loud music and a bunch of out-of-it-looking guys, I decided to hide. It sounds ridiculous now, but I hid under my bed. They roamed noisily about the place, smashing things, stealing anything they could find, including all my power tools. Yeah, they also trashed my car for the fun of it. I didn't know what was going on, and I decided to move out of the house. After the first night, I watched from over the other side of the lake near where the container was buried and hidden by a stand of trees. A couple more groups came, mostly men, sometimes with a woman or two, but they all seemed drunk as skunks. They ran through the house, screaming and hollering and vandalising the place until there was nothing left to take. After a while, they stopped coming. I stayed camped out in the container for nearly a year. Yeah, the container wasn't full, but it was a veritable storehouse. And maybe I should have stayed longer, but my feet got itchy. After a couple of weeks, I started dodging out locally to try and figure out what was what. On the first night I ventured out, I went to the nearest village where I bought supplies when I first got down there. It was hard to believe the world had fallen apart so quickly, but it had. The shop had been ransacked, and at the back in the storeroom were the bodies of the owners. The village was in darkness. There were bodies in the street. If anyone still lived in the village, they were laying low, maybe watching. I went back to my spot in the container. I began to walk about the local countryside at night. To say I was frightened underplays the state I was in. I was alone. I found dead bodies in the lanes, and when I ventured into darkened houses to try to understand what had happened to the world, I found suicides, the corpses putrefying. England isn't vast. It's not America or Australia or Africa. It doesn't have the thousands upon thousands of miles of open country, and ultimately, it's possible to walk anywhere. And when I left, I walked. I packed a haversack with water, dried fruit, a few tins of beans, stew, tinned fruit, and a sleeping bag. I don't know why, but I didn't know what else to do. I walked at night mostly and would hole up in abandoned houses or barns. There were hundreds. It was as though disaster had driven people to abandon their well-ordered lives for suicide or the road. Who could know? Maybe, like them, I was looking for something, but if I was, I didn't know what. I didn't look for other people, but I wasn't alone. I'd see other travellers like me ducking into hedgerows just like me. Avoidance was the order of the day. Trust was gone. Sometimes a vehicle would come lumbering down the road. There were always armed men on board. In an almost silent world, the noise of the vehicles made them easy to avoid, and it was easy to guess what those men were about. Everyone I ran into had heard about the slave camps, and I'd come across a couple in my travels. They didn't look very pleasant. For a time, we survivors, almost like some unspoken rule, avoided or ignored each other. As time went on, sometimes, when the need for human contact became overbearing, I would gather with others around a communal fire and we'd swap what information we had. The talk would inevitably veer towards the whys and wherefores of the collapse, to indulge in that weird human desire to comprehend the incomprehensible, to understand its own stupidity. I just didn't get the point. Whatever the past had promised, it was all over now. Me, I'd just move away from the fire and slide into my sleeping bag. I'd been scuttling down in the far reaches of Kent for weeks, avoiding any other human contact. I was lonely and depressed, I guess. As time passed, it was hard to see a reason to go on. One day after another, scrounging for food, finding somewhere to safely sleep. It was the glimmer of the fire that had attracted me. The flickering light was so faint, it was ethereal, like something that could die at any moment, and it drew me. I clambered over the gate into the overgrown field and crept forwards. There was a man and a woman. I studied them as I lay flat in the long grass. There were a couple of rabbits hung over the fire on a spit. I'd been living out of tins for the last couple of months, and the smell of cooking meat was almost overpowering. Suddenly, the man heaved forward and dropped another piece of wood on the fire. In the sudden flare of sparks, his face became fully visible. He was smiling out into the dark. He called out, "We know you're out there. Come in. We got nothing of value here except Janie. Come in and share what we have." The sudden burst of flames began to die, but before it did, he raised a hand and gestured and said easily, "Come in." I lay in the long grass for a few moments, wondering if I was being a fool. In the end, it was the smell of cooking rabbit that got me. I rose slowly to my feet. It was my first human contact in some time. I'll never forget it. I sat by the fire, and the man was all smiles and weird bonhomie. He was a big man, about 40, face fleshy, hard, his eyes dark, and he talked about where they'd been, what they'd seen. The same old, same old. The woman said nothing, and it took me a little while to notice she was tethered by a length of rope to his waist. After we'd eaten, he relaxed back onto his elbows and asked me what I was about. I told him I just travelled and lived off what I could find. He shook his head. The way things are, the world gone to shit and all, a man needs an angle. He gestured to the rabbit bones sizzling on the fire. You think I caught these? No. This is how we live. His smile was slidey, and nodding towards Jane, he said, You want to trade? He nudged the woman in the ribs. Give him a smile, Janey. I had nothing to trade but a couple of tins of fruit, and although I hadn't been with a woman since before the end, that kind of trade went against the grain. I'd seen the same thing around other campfires, women as a commodity. I didn't like it. I took a tin of mixed fruit salad from my pack and stood it by the man. No thanks. The rabbit was enough. Here, my contribution. His smile faded down and he shrugged. Sure, no worries. The woman had her head down, hands in her lap. She looked over at me from under lowered lids, eyes sad, pleading. With no trade, the man's false bonhomie petered out and we sat around in an uncomfortable silence. I didn't like the man and I didn't like the way he used the woman. After a little while, I made my excuses, as they say, and, picking up my pack, headed towards a coppice at the back of the field to find a place to sleep. I'd used a 4-inch lock knife to eat the rabbit meat. As I stumbled past her, I dropped the knife surreptitiously in the grass. I didn't know if what they had going on was a symbiotic relationship or if she wanted her freedom. Also, the man was a lump of a fellow and probably armed. I could secretly throw down the knife, but what she did with it was down to her. I don't know how long it was, but I was almost asleep when, suddenly, she was standing there. I pulled myself out of my sleeping bag, but before I could get upright, he came rushing out of the undergrowth like a maddened bull. He raised a gun at me and shouted, Try to steal her, would you slimy shit? I'll kill ya. As he spoke, he struck out and backhanded the woman to the ground. She still had the lock knife in her hand, and from where she lay, drove the blade deep into the soft part of the leg behind his knee. With a scream of pain, he began to crumble, and as he did, I kicked the gun out of his hand. He fell face down, and Janey jumped on his back, knife raised. I grabbed the gun. Janey caught an elbow in the face and was thrown off. I shot him as he grabbed for Janey's throat. I didn't ever think of myself as a bad man. I've done bad things, well, by the lights of our previous society, but none of that false morality exists anymore. Circumstances all. Yeah, I killed that man. We stood there, strangers, eyes wide with shock. We didn't talk, didn't discuss what we had done or what we should do next, and, as though it was inevitable, I packed up my gear and, leaving him where he fell, we walked off into the night. After we'd gone a little way, I stopped, untied the length of rope still attached to her waist, and we walked on. For the first few weeks, we didn't talk much, just the questions we needed to ask to stay safe. Where we'd stay, for how long, when we should move on. We didn't argue about petty things because in the world there was nothing petty left to argue about. It was about survival. We walked mostly at night. We walked side by side, but there was a distance between us. I knew she was watching me, and who could blame her? When we found a safe place to sleep or to hole up for a few days, we'd prepare food and eat together. But when it came time to bed down, she'd take the farthest room away from me to sleep in. I'm not the most sensitive man in the world, but I understood Janey had suffered, been abused, and, to be honest, I didn't know how to help with that. All I could do was be careful, and that made me nervous and shy. Yeah, we were a strange pair back then, living cheek by jowl 24/7, but never physically touching, never intimate in any way. No, for us, it wasn't love at first sight. For me, though, The months of being with Janie, of having someone to travel with, made a profound difference. That loneliness and the sense of dread I'd lived with since the end seemed to ease, but it grew into more than that. Over time, we became easier with each other, shared small bits of our pasts and little jokes about our situation, the country, the world. I know it's a bit of if you were the only girl in the world type thing, and to me she was, but I was attracted to Janie. Like I said, the situation made me shy and I didn't know how to approach her. I didn't want Janie to sleep with me because of what had happened when we first met. I didn't want to be her new protector. I didn't want to use her. I wanted her to want me, you know? Ordnance survey maps are a wonderful thing. They show every building, every tiny lane and track. That was how we found places to stay. Some of the houses we camped in had already been stripped bare. Sometimes we came across dead, almost mummified bodies, probably left over from one of the many pandemics which had swept away thousands upon thousands in the aftermath of the end. We didn't bother to bury the dead. What was the point? We'd roll the bodies in blankets, drag them outside and leave them for the critters. Other houses we chanced on were untouched, dusty museums to the middle-class dream. These were favourite, little storehouses of food and sometimes drink. We'd followed an overgrown track towards a building marked on the Sussex map which seemed far enough from any road to hopefully offer a safe haven. The house was large and deserted. There were two vehicles parked in the garage, tyres flat. It was a Mary Celeste of a place, dust covered but kind of pristine too, almost as though the occupants had cleaned the entire place before leaving. We scouted through the rooms for the dead, but there were none. All the beds were made. There were clothes in the wardrobes and chests of drawers. Where had these people gone? What had happened to them? We couldn't even guess. It was strange. The fridge was clean and empty, but in the basement, the chest freezer was full of rotten food. The kitchen was vast, with a central aisle and with all those now useless labour-saving devices. There was evidence of rodents in the base units, but the wall cupboards had been untouched, and inside there was pasta, rice, bottles of tomato sauce, tins of beans, fruit, packets of biscuits, well past their sell-by date but unopened and good to go. There were 2 tins of ham, packs of dried noodles, chilli, soya sauce, a bottle of vodka, whiskey and some wine. That's how it happened. We were sitting drunk and sort of happy, laughing at some stupid remark one of us had made, and suddenly we were kissing. And then the rest is history, as they say. Yeah, we finally slept together. I was so happy. It was like the best thing that had ever happened to me. But in the quiet aftermath, Janie started to cry. It was a soft sound, and I was stunned. It was a jolt to my joy. What was wrong? What was going on? She pushed herself against me. I'm sorry. It's like I've forgotten what it's like to be happy. That got me, and I didn't know myself then whether to laugh or cry. We stayed in that house for over 2 weeks before we moved on. Nothing much changed in what we did except for having someone, a lover, a partner, made the difference in both our lives. We'd mostly stay hidden in the day and didn't use roads until dark, and then only B roads. We wandered around for a couple of years more, living pretty much as I'd lived since the end. The world was full of stuff, and for a long time it was easy to find food, clothes, bottled water. Any fool knew that wasn't real life. It was a bit like being on a dodgy adventure holiday. There were no direction, nothing to push us beyond food and a place to sleep. It was a long hiatus, and maybe that was what Janie and I needed to adjust to each other and to the world. There were still slave camps about, and others, wanderers like us, and we'd also heard of small alternative communes, but neither of us had enough trust in other people to want to join any group. On the other hand, we've both had enough of roaming. You could say we were lucky, and I know from experience being lucky is best. This house stands mostly hidden in the lee of a hill with thick woods up to the top of the rise and beyond. It's not a big place, 2 bedrooms, a large, old-fashioned kitchen come living room. Again, who knows what happened to the owners? Maybe, like many, they'd abandoned their home in the aftermath and began to roam, and then, who knows? We'd stayed in so many empty, abandoned houses. In the end, you stop asking the who or the why. You use what you can and move on. This time, we decided to stay. There's an open fire and a Rayburn to cook on. The Rayburn has a back boiler which is on a closed system and runs to a couple of radiators, one in the living room and one in the main bedroom, and in winter that is pure luxury to us. There's no running water, so the rest of the plumbing in the house is as good as useless. I dug a long drop toilet. I dig a new one every couple of years. There's a well with sweet water. After we'd moved in, I went out on the scrounge for pipe work and managed to make up a hand pump. It looks a bit Wild West, but works just fine. There's a large garden and an acre field beyond, and Janie and I have managed to grow most of what we've needed thanks to the self-sufficiency book. Over the years, we've had goats and chickens. The goats give us milk and meat. The chickens give us eggs and meat. The woods stretch up and over the hill and are extensive. There's wild pigs and deer, and if you are half capable in this world, you'd never starve. I hunt with a bow. It took a little while for us to get used to staying in one place, but Janie and I settled in nicely over a couple of years. Janie was the love of my life. I know it's an overused term from the old days, but she was. We were practically together 24/7 for over 2 decades, and I never saw a fault in her. She was honest and true. We were just about everything to each other, and not many people can say that. For all the shit in the world, we were together, loved and loved about. We worked to make a life for ourselves, basic as it was. We rarely spoke about the past or what we'd done to get where we were. We both knew. Love is a wonderful thing. It altered the way I felt about the future, about everything. Our love gave me hope. In this post world, the one question you have to answer is, what is most valuable to you? Forget gold or silver Krugerrands or diamonds. What use is stuff like that? Those things are only useful in a world that values them. In this world, the fit survive, not the rich. In reality, the most useful thing for me has been John Seymour's book, Self-Sufficiency. It is probably the most valuable thing I have. It was on the bookshelf when we moved in. That book has taught me how to kill a pig, make ham, sausages and bacon, how to grow and preserve all manner of fruit and veg, and to plant enough potatoes to last all winter. It taught me how to really survive year on year. We humans created a horrible outrage on ourselves, but whatever we did wrong is over and gone now, and even 25 or more years on, survival is still the new reality. Often in this world, that ain't nothing nice, and you have to take pleasure where you can. For some, it may be charging up some old electric car from dying solar panels and having a little joyride. I still get a bit of power from our ancient solar panels, and then I play blues music on an old solid-state record player, left by the last person to live here, and I dance about like a fool. Janie and I used to do it together like a summertime ritual to joy. Like, here we are, alive. Yeah. I still do it, sometimes in tears. I miss her. He used to freak Ty out when he was younger, but now he just shakes his head and disappears to his room. Ty. About a year after Janie died, I decided to kill myself. With Janie gone, all I saw ahead of me were lonely years. People think it's easy to kill yourself, and maybe for some people it is. You just do this or take that and you're dead. I think you have to be desperate, more desperate than I was, because it was the doing of this or that which was hard for me. I sat there for a long time, the rifle in my hands, finger on the trigger. I was a survivor, and in the end, maybe all I needed was something to distract me, to alter the flow of my mind. Here in the countryside, your ears get attuned to that particular silence of the place. Before the end, the silence would have been less acute, less natural. Planes overhead, the distant grumble of farm machinery, cars on the road. The sound I heard was nothing more than a rustle. I listened. It came again. I stood the rifle aside. I hadn't used it in 10 years anyway. I hunted with a bow, and quiet like, I picked up the axe I kept beside the bed. Suicide on the back burner. Someone once said, I don't remember who, a man with a good axe doesn't need to be justified. Every once in a while, we'd had stray people try to rob us. I could understand we'd been there ourselves. The nice ones we fed and gave them what we could. The bad ones, well, they left or fuck them. Janie and me, we were both good with hand tools. Quiet like. This is a very old house, and it's impossible to get down the stairs silently. So I barreled down with as much shock value noise as I could. The door at the bottom opens out into the kitchen living room, and I came through it like a hurricane. Well, an aged strong wind. The kid had dark eyes and a dirty face, and he was quick. One glance over his shoulder and he was gone for the open kitchen door. I threw the axe. It landed thunk into the door frame a few inches above his head. That slowed him down. I grabbed him and dragged him outside by the scruff of his neck. I'd seen kids like this before. Sad, broken things, used and abused. Humans don't change for the better in a catastrophe. Why would he knock? From his point of view, it was easier, safer to creepy crawl, to take what he wanted and disappear. We looked at each other, him poised for flight. Me? I don't know. The boy held a bag tight in his arms. Look, all he was doing was trying to save himself. I knew that. Blimey, if he'd have knocked on the door and asked, I would have fed him, wouldn't I? I grabbed the bag and upended it onto the grass. There were a couple of eggs smashed now, 4 sausages, a jar of blackberry jam I made the previous autumn, and a hunk of bacon sliced off the flitch. It was pathetic. To me, he looked about 12, small, skinny. I looked down at his feet. They were bare. I found out later he was 14. He'd been born in a camp. His mother had died when he was 8. A lot of people in the camp had died. He didn't know from what. Cholera, typhoid. I'd come across a few of those camps in the first years of my travels. None looked like anything I would want to join. I'd watched, hidden beyond the perimeters, as men with guns controlled the people like slaves, making them work the surrounding fields. Most looked beaten into submission and half-starved. I looked at him and wondered how he'd managed to survive so long. But then, I'd managed to survive. In this world, that's all there was, and I thought about the rifle in the bedroom and felt pathetic. The kid was only trying to stay alive. I picked the stuff up off the grass and put the bits and bobs back in the bag. I tossed the bag to him and we stood staring at each other for a few minutes. I gestured to the house and said, I got some venison stew inside. I'll heat some up for you. I left him there. He didn't run, but was on guard, eyes darting about as though he expected someone else to come out and grab him. I ladled some hot soup into a bowl, stood it on the kitchen doorstep and backed off. He grabbed the bowl in 2 hands and began to slurp away. When he was done, he came forward and put the bowl back by the door. I went back into the garden, my hands up, palms out. I asked, you got somewhere to sleep tonight? Eyes to the ground, he wiped his nose on one of his raggedy sleeves. I took that as a no. There's a brick-built shed attached to the back of the house. I gestured for him to follow me, which he did, but kept himself well out of reach. I couldn't blame him. It's hard to trust people. The shed was empty, but for a few logs left over from the winter stash. The door had an old-fashioned rim lock with a big key. I unlocked the door and said, "You can sleep here if you want." I handed him the key. Eyes to the ground, he moved his torso from side to side and looked at the key almost like he didn't comprehend. I left him, went back to the house and grabbed a couple of blankets and a sleeping bag. I gave them to him and then went up to the back field with a hoe to weed between the rows of young onions and cabbages. For the first few weeks, it was like trying to engage with a wild animal. I put food out and he ate it, always locking himself in the shed at night. Daytime, he'd sit outside the shed and watch me work. Then, one morning, when he'd eaten, he came over and started weeding on the farthest row from me. I didn't acknowledge him, just kept my head down and carried on like it was normal. The next morning, he was sitting outside the shed, and for the first time, he took the plate from me, and for the first time too, looked me in the eye and he said, "Thanks." My heart went out to him, but I still kept my distance and told him, "I don't want anything. You can stay here or you can go. You choose." I left it at that and went to the onions and started weeding. When he'd eaten, he started on the young cabbages. It was slow going, but we worked together all that summer, and in the autumn, I invited him to come and live in the house. In the early days, if he wanted to move the position of Janie's armchair or didn't put the pots back in the right place, I had to bite my tongue. Sometimes Janie was still present. We worked through it though, because in the end, we both had to adjust. He'd been living rough for a long time, and sometimes it was hard for him to see beyond his momentary needs. He's a good kid though. I remember when he first arrived that spring, none of the clothes in the house fitted his skinny frame. It's been nearly 4 years and he's filled out, had a growth spurt. Decent food will do that for you. There's not much need to go hungry in this world if you can hunt. There are plenty of deer, plus turkey, grouse, partridges, pigs. All have reverted to the wild and the hunting season doesn't exist anymore. We're never short of meat. Yeah, hunting. Hunting was how I first ran into the people over the hill. One of them nearly got an arrow in his arse. He was collecting mushrooms and didn't hear me. I moved silently until I was behind him, levelled the bow and coughed. He didn't even look behind him or stand up, but laughed. "Fuck off, Darren." I was at a loss for a moment. I couldn't believe anyone alive and kicking in this world could be so unconscious of their personal safety. I thought of poking him in the arse with the arrow instead. I said, "I ain't Darren." Very slowly, he looked over his shoulder, and when he saw me, it was the way a rabbit looks a second before it dies. He raised his hands above his head and got to his feet. He was in his mid-20s, tall and skinny, with a straggly beard and curly black hair. He was completely unarmed. I know, in a way, we all live in our own world, but then there is the real world. I kept the bow up and said, "What are you doing here?" Waving an arm behind him, he swallowed. We live over the hill, through the woods." I lowered the bow and arrow. He said, "The farmhouse?" I knew the farmhouse. I'd scavenged the place years before. He tried a wary smile. "Oh, we've been there for 2 years. We keep ourselves to ourselves, You? What about you?" I pointed through the trees and said, "Below." His smile widened. "Ah, the little house, yeah. We've seen the smoke. Thought about coming down, but you know how it is." I nodded. I knew how it was. His name was Decker, and he offered me his hand. I took it. It was the first time I'd touched another human other than Janie for I don't know how long, and it was strange. The dry, firm feel of his flesh was almost electric. He asked me if I wanted to come up to the farmhouse with him and meet the others, but I didn't go. I was too nervous, too unused to company. I came back here and told Janie, and she laughed at me. The next day, despite my grumbles, Janie dragged me up there. We took gifts of sausages and bacon and veg from the garden. Not that they needed the food, they seemed to be doing pretty well. After the first visit, we went up to see them a few times. There were three guys, Darren, Joe, Decker, and two women, Tam and May, and a girl, Billy. Billy was the daughter of May. We spent time. We ate with them, and I guess you'd call it socialised. It was a new thing for us. They seemed decent skins, good people, and I've got to say, at the time, I enjoyed their company. Before Janie died, they came down to us too. They were a tight but relaxed group. We talked about this and that and the best way to grow veg and exchanged tips on the best places to forage and hunt. They told us that there were paths now, almost like those old-time ley lines, running between the few groups like theirs that were now coming into existence. In a way, Janie and I had been isolated for so long. What they told us was interesting, but for us, hard to judge if it was a good or a bad thing. I avoided the people over the hill after Janie died. I didn't have it in me to socialise. I thought, what were they to me? Strangers. The one Decker came knocking on the door a couple of times to check on me, but I was barely polite. No. I was downright ignorant and he stopped coming. I'd noticed Ty had been going up to the house over the hill a bit recently. I didn't mind, I just thought he needed more company, more than an old dude like me. But there was more to it than that, and although the world had changed, nature is nature. See, when I first ran into the group, Billy was about 10 or so. I guess she'd be a girl of about 15 now. When I realised that, then I understood and it made me smile. There wasn't much chance to socialise with the opposite sex, so good luck to him. When Ty came to me and asked if I minded him going up there, he was shy, and I couldn't help laughing. I said, "Why would I mind? Is she pretty?" Ty looked down at his boots and after a moment looked up at me. He was smiling. He shrugged. "I think she is." I nodded. "Is it Billy? Bring her down if you want. It's good you made a friend." I had another little incident. Well, bigger. I knew something was wrong with me. Like I said, my heart. Sometimes I had these pains over my heart and cramps down my left arm. It was a worry, but what could I do? Mostly, I hoped I'd succeeded in hiding my little problem from Ty. The boy had had enough trouble in his life, and then he was sitting at the table when it happened. I collapsed this time, in the kitchen, and our supper ended up all over the floor. A hot pain shot down my arm and it was like my whole body seized, and the next thing I knew, I was on the floor and Ty had my head in his lap. I looked up at him, but he had big fat tears in his eyes ready to drop. I tried to speak, but all that came out was a croak. He opened and shut his mouth and finally managed, "Don't die, please don't die." There was a kind of terror in his voice and 2 tears dropped from his eyes onto my shirt. I reached up with the one arm that was working and rested it on his chest and tried to reassure him, but all I managed was a croak. "Water, please." Gently, he rested my head back on the floor, went to the jug we kept by the sink and helped me drink from a cup. We stayed that way until I could move, and then he helped me up to my room. I slept and slept, aware occasionally of Ty's near silent entry, his help feeding me, and other less pleasant jobs that reminded me of Janie. But I wasn't going to die. Well, I didn't think I was. After a couple of days, when I was sitting up and feeding myself, Ty came into the room with Billy, the girl from over the hill, and Decker. Decker had a stethoscope hanging round his neck like a regular doctor, but I think it was more of a comfort blanket. His father had been a doctor but had died trying to combat cholera in one of the camps somewhere up near what used to be Leicester. He pressed the stethoscope to my chest, listened, and said, "Your heart's regular, but it's not that strong. You should start taking it easy." He jerked his head in the direction of Ty. "Let this fella do the heavy stuff. Sit about, convalesce, be looked after. Next time?" He shook his head and shrugged. "Who knows?" He took a paper wrap from the pocket of his shirt and handed it to Ty. "Give him a cup of this every morning. It'll help thin his blood." Ty looked dubiously at the packet and shook it. What is it?" Decker touched the side of his nose with his index finger and grinned. "That's for me to know and you to wonder at." Seeing neither Ty nor I looked impressed, he turned serious. "It's just a mixture of common garden herbs, dill, oregano." He shrugged. "A little thyme. I've got some books. I've been reading up on homeopathic remedies. Anyway, I've been drinking the tea. It doesn't taste very nice, and I have no idea if it's doing any good. But here I am, sitting outside in the sun. It's taken a couple of weeks, and I can move about again now, but I take it slow. Ty's been great. Himself and Billy really looking after me. She's been staying over. He bought me a plate of stew a little while ago, and it kind of reminded me of the day he'd turned up, and I'd done the same for him. It touched my heart, but in a good way. It's a wonderful spring day. It rained last night and the world smells good and looks even better, all green. The sky is soft blue, light and devoid of clouds. Up in the field I can hear Ty and Billy laughing as they work. It's such a wonderful sound, and even the state I'm in gives me a sense of hope and wonder.